I'm fixing to take you back to a simpler time. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. This is Rebel Spurs by Andre Norton. In 1866, only men uprooted by war had reason to ride into Tubaca, Arizona. A nondescript town as shattered and anonymous as the veterans drifting through it. So when Drew Rennie, newly discharged from Forrest's Confederate Scouts, arrived leading everything he owned behind him, his thoroughbred stud Shiloh, a mare about to foal, and a mule, he knew his business would not be questioned. To anyone in Tubaca, there would be only one extraordinary thing about Drew, and that could not reveal his name, Rennie. Drew had come up west from Kentucky to find a father he had thought dead until a year before. Kinship with a man like Hunt Rennie, however, a legendary Don Cazar, owner of the matchless range and prize stallions, was not a claim to be made quickly or lightly. Posing as Drew Kirby, the young veteran contrived to get himself and his friend Ance hired as corral hands at Rennie's range. But he was hardly prepared for the suspicion and danger which stood between him and his father. As hot-headed as his father, Drew was ready to move on to California until the day all proof of Rennie's name was stolen from him, and his unwarranted arrest for horse thieving brought on the accusations of the one man whose trust he needed. Even the coming of an autumn dusk could not subdue the color of this land. Shadows here were not gray or black. They were violet and purple. The crumbling adobe walls were laced by strings of crimson peppers, vivid in the torch and lantern light. It had been this way for days, red and yellow and violet, colors he had hardly been aware existed back in the cool green, silver, gray-brown of Kentucky. So this was Tubaca. The rider shifted his weight in the saddle and gazed about him with watchful interest. Back in '59 had been a flourish in town, well on its way to prominence in the Southwest. The mines in the hills behind producing wealth. The fact that it was a watering place on two cross-country roads, the one from Tucson down into Sonora of Mexico, and the other into California, had all fed its growth. Then the war. The withdrawal of the army, the invasion of Sibley's Confederate forces, which had reached this far in the persons of Howard's Arizona Rangers, and most of all, raiding, vicious, deadly, and continual by Apaches and outlaws, had blasted Tubaca. Now in the fall of 1866 it was a third of what it had been, with a ragged fringe of dilapidated adobes crumbling back into the soil. Only this heart core was still alive in the dusk. Smell, a myriad of smells, some to tickle a flat stomach, others to wrinkle the nose. Under the rider the big stud moved, tossed his head, drawing the young man's attention from the town back to his own immediate concerns. The animal he rode, the two he led, were at first glance far more noticeable than the dusty rider himself. His saddle was cinched about the barrel of the big gray colt, one that could not have been more than 5 years old, but showed enough power and breeding to attract attention in any horse-conscious community. Here was a thoroughbred of the same blood which had pounded the tracks in Virginia and Kentucky to best all comers. Even now, after weeks on the trail, with a day's burden of alkali dust grimed into his coat, the stud was a beautiful thing, and his match was a mare on the lead rope, plainly a lady of the family, perhaps of the same line, since her coat was also silver. She crowded closer, nickered plaintively. She was answered by an anxious bray from the fourth member of the party. The mule bearing the trail pack was in ludicrous contrast to his own aristocratic companions. His long head, with one entirely limp and flopping ear, was grotesquely ugly. The carcass beneath the pack, a bone rack, all sharp angles and dusty hide. Looks, however, at his master could have proven were deceiving. "So," the rider's voice was husky from swallowing trail dirt, but it was tuned to the soothing croon of a practiced horse trainer. "So, lady, just a little farther now, girl." From the one-story building on the rider's right, a man emerged. He paused to light a long Mexican cigarillo, and as he held the match to let the sulfur burn away, his eyes fell upon the stallion. A casual interest tightened into open appreciation as he stepped from under the porch overhang into the street. "That is some horse," he said. His voice was that of an educated gentleman. The lantern at the end of the porch picked out the fine ruffled linen of his shirt, a vest with a painted design of fighting cocks, and a wink of gold buttons. The rather extravagant color of his clothing matched well with the town. "I think so." The answer was short, yet not discourteous. Again the mare voiced her complaint, and the rider turned to the gentleman. "There's a livery stable here, sir." Unconsciously he reverted in turn to a rather formal speech pattern of another place and time. The man in the painted vest had transferred his attention from the stallion to the mare. "Yes, quickest way is down the alley. Toby Kells owns it. He's tolerable vet. She's near her time, ain't she?" "Yes." The rider raised one finger to the straight wide brim of his low-crowned black hat. He was already turning his mount when the townsman added, "No hotel here, stranger, but the Four Jacks serves as a pretty good meal and keeps a couple of beds for overnighters. You're welcome back when you've settled the little lady. She Virginia stock?" "Kentucky," the rider answered, and then his lips tightened into a compressed line. Was it a mistake to admit even that much? He would have to watch every word he said in this town. He tugged gently at the lead rope and walked Shiloh ahead at a pace which did not urge Shadow to any great effort. The mule, Croaker, fell in behind her so that they were strung out in a familiar pattern which had been theirs clear from Texas. Minutes later, her owner was rubbing down the fretful Shadow, murmuring. The soothing words kept her quiet. The lean, gray-haired man who had ushered them into the stable stood eyeing the mare's distended sides. "I'd say, young fellow, you didn't get here a mite too soon. No, sirree. She's due right quick, carrying a bloodful, I'm thinking." "Yeah, how soon? Tonight?" Toby Kells made a quick examination. The mare, after first nervous start, stood easy under his sure and gentle hands. "Late, maybe. First foal?" "Yeah." Her owner hesitated and then added, "You give me a hand with her?" "You bet, son. She's a pretty thing, and she's been a far piece, I'd say. Now you looky here, boy. You sure look like you could use some currying and corn fodder under your belt, too. You get over to the Four Jacks. Topham's got him a Chinese cook there who serves up the best dang grub in here town. Fill up your belly and take some ease. Then if we do have this little lady getting us up tonight, you'll be ready for it. I'll see to the stud and the mule. Colt's not a wild one." Kell surveyed Shiloh knowingly. "Nah, I seed he was a gentle train when you came in." He ran his hand down Shadow's shoulder and touched the brand. He goes, "Spur R. That ain't no outfit I heard tell of before." "From eastern Texas." That much was true. All three animals had been given the brand in the small Texas town where the wagon train had assembled, and perhaps this was the time when he should begin building up the background one Drew Kirby must be president to Baca, Arizona territory. "All right, I'll go eat." He picked up his saddlebags. You call me if sure, son. Say, I don't rightly know your name." "It's Drew Kirby." Well, sure, Kirby. Toby Kells is a man of his word. If there's a reason to think you'll be needed, I'll send Callie along for you. Hey, Callie. At Kells' hail, Boyd swung down from the loft ladder. He was wiry, thin, with thick mop of sun-bleached hair and a flashing grin. At the sight of Shiloh and Shadow, he whistled. Now, ain't they the purtiest things? He inquired of the stable at large about the best stock we've had in here since the last time Don Kazar brought in a couple of his'n. Where I'll put your plunder, mister. He was already loosening Croker's pack. You be staying over the Jacks? Drew glanced up at the hay mow from which Callie had just descended. Any reason why I can't bunk up there? He asked Kells. None 'tall. Kirby, none 'tall. No, you want to be handy-like. Stow that gear up above, Callie, and don't you drop nothing. Rest yourself easy, son. These here hosses is going to be treated just like good stuff that they is. Croker also. Drew stopped by the mule, patted the long nose, gave a flip to the limp ear. He's good stuff, too. Served in the cavalry. Kells studied the young man by the mule. Cavalry saddle on the stud, 2 Colt pistols belted high and butt forward, and that military cord on his hat. Army boots, too. Liveryman knew the signs. This was not the first veteran to drift into Tobacco. He wouldn't be the last, either. Seems like half of both them armies back east didn't want to go home and sit down peaceful like now that there was no shooting. No sirree. A right big herd of 'em was trailing out here, and he thought he could put a name to the color of his coat with this young'un had on his back, too. Only asking more than a man volunteered to tell, that weren't neither manners nor wise. He gets the best, too. Kirby. Kells shifted a well-chewed tobacco cud from one cheek to the other. He could trust Kells, Drew thought. A little of his concern over Shadow eased. He shouldered the saddlebags and made his way back down the alley, beginning to see the merit in the liverman's suggestions. Food and a bath. What he wouldn't give for a bath. Hay to sleep on was fine. He had far worse beds during the past 4 years, but a hot bath to be followed by a meal, which wasn't jerky, cornmeal, bitter coffee, and trail cooking. His pace quickened to a trot, but slackened again as he heard the 4 Jacks, and remembered all the precautions he must take in Tobacco. In the big room of the cantina, oil lamps made yellow pools of light. The man in the painted vest was seated at the table laying out cards in a complicated pattern of solitaire game. And at one side, a round-faced Mexican in ornate, south-of-the-border clothing held a guitar across one plump knee, now and then again plucking absent-mindedly at a single string as he stared raptly into space. A third man stood behind the bar, polishing thick glasses. Greetings, as Drew stirred, blinking within the doorway. The card player rose. He was a tall, wide-shouldered man, a little too thin for his height. Deep lines, clean-shaven face bracketed his wide mouth. His curly hair was a silvery brawn, and he had dark, deeply set eyes. I'm Reese Topham, owner of this oasis, he introduced himself. Drew Kirby. He must remember that always. He was Drew Kirby, a Texan schooled with kinfolk in Kentucky, who served in the war under Forrest and was now drifting west, as there were countless other rootless Confederate veterans. Actually, the story was close enough to the truth, and he had months of the trail from San Antonio to Santa Fe, then on to Tucson to study up any small invented details. He was Drew Kirby, Texan, not Drew Rennie of Red Springs, Kentucky. For a man just off the trail, Kirby, the 4 Jacks does have a few of the delights of civilization. A bath, One of Topman's dark eyebrows, so in contrast with his silvery hair, slid up inquiringly, and he grinned at Drew's involuntary but empathetic nod. One of nature's gifts to our fair city is the hot spring, Hamilcar. His hand met table top in a sharp slap. The Mexican jerked fully awake and looked around. From the back of the cantina emerged a middle-aged Negro. "Yes, Mr. Reese, sir. Customer for you, Hamilcar. I would judge he wants the full treatment. This Mr. Kirby is the best barber, valet, and general aid to comfort in town. The sultan of our bath, Hamilcar. Mr. Kirby would like to remove the layers of dust he's managed to pick up. Good luck to both of you." Drew found himself laughing as he followed Hamilcar to the rear of the building. Topham had reason to be proud of his bath. Drew admitted sometime later a natural hot spring might be the base of luxury, but man's labor had piped the water into a stone slab tub and provided soap and towels. To sit and soak was a delight he forgotten. He shampooed his unkempt head vigorously and allowed himself to forget all his worries, wallowing in the sheer joy of being really clean again. Hamilcar had produced a clean shirt and drawers from the saddlebags, even managing to work up a shadow of shine on the scuffed cavalry boots, and he had beat the worst of the trail and dust from the rest of his traveler's clothing. Drew had redressed, except for his gun belt, when he heard a voice call from the next cubicle. "Ham, you get yourself in here, for I can't skin that black hide." "Johnny," Toppin's voice cut through the other's thickened slur, "you soak that rock gut out of you, and mind your tongue while you do it." Sure, Reese." The voice was pitched and lower this time, but to Drew the tone was more mocking than conciliatory. Drunk or sober, that stranger did not hold very kindly Top's thoughts of Topham, but that was none of Kentuckian's business. "Your hat, sir." Hamilcar brought in the well-brushed headgear, much more respectable looking than it had been an hour ago. The cord on it glistened, army issue, brave gold bullion made for a general's wearing. Drew straightened it, and remembering Sergeant Rennie of the Scouts, in from an independent foray into enemy-held Tennessee, reporting to the old man himself, General Bedford Forrest, and Forrest saying, "We don't give medals, Sergeant, but I think a good soldier just might be granted a birthday present without anyone getting too excited about how military that is." Then he had jerked the cord off his own hat and given it to Drew. It was something big to remember when you're only 19 and have been soldiering for 3 years. 3 years with a dogged army that refused to be beaten. That hat cord, the spurs on his boots, they were all he had home from the war. Save a tough body and mind he hoped was hard. "Mighty pretty hat trimming there, sir," Hamilcar admired. "Mighty big man wore it once." Drew was still half in the past. "What do I owe you? More'n thanks of almighty tired man. You turned out brand new again." He smiled and was suddenly all boy. "Full bit, sir. And it was a pleasure to do for a gentleman." Truly was. "Come again, sir. Come again." Drew went down the corridor, his spurs answering with a chiming ring each time his heels met planking. Worn at Chapultepec by a Mexican officer, they had been claimed as spoils of war in '47 by a Texas Ranger, and in '61 the Ranger's son, Anson Kirby, had jingled them off into another war. Then Kirby had disappeared during the last scout in Tennessee, vanishing into nowhere, when he fell wounded from the saddle, smashing into a bushwhacker's hideout. On a Sunday in May of '65, back in Gainesville, when Forrest's men had finally accepted surrender and deadness of defeat, a Union trooper had worn those spurs into church, and Boyd Barrett had sold his horse. A Union trooper had worn those spurs into church, and Boyd Barrett had sold his horse the same day to buy back those silver bits because he knew what they meant to his cousin Drew. Now here Drew was, half a continent away from Gainesville in Tennessee, wearing Aunt's spurs and half of Aunt's name to find a father he had not known was still alive till last year. The Kentuckian was sure of only one thing right now. He was not going to enter a town or a stretch of country where Hunt Rennie was the big man and claim to be Rennie's unknown son. Maybe later he could come to a decision about his action, but first he wanted to be sure. There might well be no place for Drew Rennie. May be no place at all. Drew Rennie and Hunt Rennie's present life, they were total strangers, and perhaps it must be left that way. There was no reason for him to claim the kinship. He was independent. Drew Kirby had a mule and 2 good horses, maybe 3 by tomorrow. Aunt Mariana had insisted that he accept part of the Maddox estate, even though his Kentucky grandfather had left him penniless. He made his choice without hesitation, the colt Shiloh, the mare Shadow, and she bred the Storm Cloud for what should be a prize foal. His aunt made him take more gold on his money belt, even enough to give him a start in the West. He was his own man, not Rennie's son, unless he chose. 2 more lamps had been lighted in the cantina. Drew sat down at a table. There was a swish of full skirts, and he looked up at a girl. She smiled as if she liked what she saw of this brown-faced stranger with quiet, disciplined features and eyes older than his years. "You like, senor? Tequila, whiskey, food." "Food, senorita. You see a most hungry man." She laughed and then frowned anxiously. "Ah, but senor, this is a time when the cupboard is, as you would say, bare. When the wagons come, then, oh, what a difference. Now, tortillas, frijoles, maybe some fruit, sweet for the tongue, like wine in the throat, perhaps an egg." To me, that's a feast. Drew fell into the formal speech, which seemed natural here. You see one who has done his own trail cooking too long. "Ah, el pobrete, poor man. Sure, there'll be an egg." She was gone, and Drew began covertly to study the other men in the room. In any western town, the cantina or saloon was the meeting place for masculine society. Even if Hunt Rennie did not appear bodily in the Four Jacks tonight, Drew could pick up information about his father merely by keeping his ears open. As far as Santa Fe, he had heard of Rennie's Range and the Don Cazar, the name the Mexicans had given its owner, Hunt Rennie. Escaped from a Mexican prison in 1847, believing his wife and son had never seemed to be dead, Hunt Rennie had gone west. In contrast to the tragedy of his personal life, whatever Rennie had turned his hand to in the New Terry had prospered. A prospector, he had grub-staked, found Oro Cruz, one of the richest mines in the Tubaca Hills. Rennie owned 2 freighting lines, one carrying goods to California, the other from Sonora, and his headquarters in fertile Santa Cruz Valley, where there was a ranch which was also a fort. A fort even the Apaches avoided after they had suffered 2 overwhelming defeats there. That was Rennie's range, cultivated fields, fruit orchards, manadas of fine horses. Don Cazar supplied Tucson and many army posts with vegetables and superb hams. He had organized matchless company of Pima Indian Scouts after the army pulled out in 61. and had fought Apaches, but had sided with neither Union nor Confederate. During the war years, he had more or less withdrawn within the borders of the range, offering refuge to settlers and miners fleeing Indian attacks. Don Cazar was a legend now, and a man did not quickly claim his kinship with a legend. "You want a room, Kirby?" Topman paused beside his table. "No, I have to stay close to the mare." "Yes, I can understand that. Kells is good with horses, so you needn't worry. Even race that colt of yours." "Ever raced that colt of yours?" "Not officially," Drew smiled. There was that lieutenant with supply wagons. The man hadn't talked so loudly about Johnny Rebs after Shiloh showed his seals to the roan, the soldiers he had bragged up. "This is a sporting town. When the wagons come in, and they're due tomorrow, Johnny Shannon just rode up in to report. Might be some racing. You aim to stay on in Tobacco?" "Have to until Shadow can trail again." "How's the prospect for a job?" "With cattle, horses, teaming?" "Horses, I guess." "Well, Don Cazar, Rennie, runs the best manadas. You might hit him up for work. He'll be riding in to meet the wagons. Carmencita. Did you bring all that was left of the supplies?" Topman's quizzical eyebrows lifted in greeting to the waitress's loaded tray. "I'd say, young man, that you're facing a full-time job now, getting all that inside you." Drew ate steadily, consuming eggs and beans and tortillas and fruit. Topman joined 3 men at the next table. Substantial town citizens, Drew judged. The owner of the cantina raised his glass. "Gentlemen, I give you another successful trading trip." "Saw Johnny ride in," one of the men returned. "Kid seems to be settling down, ain't he?" "That ought to be good news for Rennie." "One believes in reformations when they're proven by time, Senor Cahill." The man wearing the rich but somber Spanish clothing replied. "It sure must go hard with a man to have his son turn out a wild one," commented the third. Drew's cup was at his lips, but he did not drink. "Whose son? Rennie's?" "No, son by blood, and that much comfort Don Cazar has. Foster ties are also strong, and the boy is still very young. A rattler with only 1 button on the tail carries as much poison as a 10-button one. Rennie ought to cut his losses and give that kid the boot. The way he's going, he could involve Hunt in a real mess," Cahill said. "You're Don Cazar's good friend. Don Reese, his compadre of many years. Can you not do something?" "Don Lorenzo, all men have blind spots, and Johnny Shannon is Rennie's. Bob Shannon helped free Hunt out of a Mexican prison in the war and was killed doing it. So as Hunt set up here, he sent for the boy and tried to give him a father. It's a great pity he has no child of his own blood. I've seen him stand here in Tobacco giving toys and candy out to the little ones. Yet he's only got this one wild one under his roof, and perhaps that Juanito will break his heart in the end." Drew put down his cup. It was very hard not to turn and ask questions. Dropping some coins on the table, he rose and started back to the table, to the world of Shiloh and Shadow, where he was unable to betray Drew Rennie. But there was so much Drew Kirby must learn, and soon. 2 lighted lanterns hung from the pegs along the center of the table. It had a mounted barrel to put up a third as Drew entered. There were the soft, peaceful sounds of horses crunching fodder, hooves rustling in the straw. Shadow turned her head and nickered as Drew came up to her box stall. She was answered by a blowing from Shiloh, a bray out of Croker. "It's all right, girl, pretty lady." Drew fondled her mane, stroked the satin smooth arch of her neck. Callie dropped from his barrel perch. "She sure is right purty, Mr. Kirby," Mr. Kell said, "as to tell you he's sleeping on a cot in the tack room over there, should you be needing him." And Callie pointed. "Me, I'm bedding down in the last stall. I'll put your gear up right over here, so's you can hear if she gets to moving." "Thanks." Drew felt in his pocket and tossed Callie the coin in his fingers. The boy caught the piece, his eyes wide round as he looked at it. "Lordy! Thanks, Mr. Kirby. You must be near as shiny as Don Cazar, or Mr. Topple." Callie laughed. "Silver, shiny. Ain't too many men as goes around Tobacco throwing out good money that-a-way. Lips it's ringing down on the bar sign across some table 'cause they found out as how they was holding jacks against some other fellas' kings. You want anything, you just holler, Mr. Kirby." "Mister?" Drew thought he had not have the advantage of Callie by more than 4 or 5 years. "Oh, Captain Kirby maybe, or Lieutenant Johnny Shannon." Now he was a lieutenant with Howard's Rangers. Callie gave Drew a shrewd, measuring look. "Sergeant," Drew corrected automatically, and then asked, "How did you know I've been in the Army?" "Well, you wear them 2 shooting army style, belted high and butt to the front. Must use a flip hand draw, as do all the soldiers. Listen, Mr. Kirby, if you rode with the Rebs, you better keep your lip buttoned up when the blue bellies hit town. There's been a pile of fighting and folks is getting mad about it." "Blue bellies?" Drew was wrenched back months, a year, by the old Army slag. "Union troops stationed here?" He had unconsciously tensed, his body responding nerve and muscle to the past training and alarms. But there were no Yanks or Rebs anymore, no riders or marchers in blue and gray, just United States troops. "There's a garrison out to the Mesa camp, and Captain Bayless, he don't take kindly to Rebs. You see, it's this way. Out on the breaks, there's a bunch of Rebs, at least the ways they claim is how they Rebs, still holding out. They hit and run, raiding ranches and mines. They held up a coach a while back, and so far they've ridden rings around the captain. Now he thinks as how any Reb blown into town could be one of 'em, come to sniff out some good pickings. So anyone as can't explain himself proper to the captain gets locked up out in the camp till he can, well, trifle high-handed, ain't he? Well, captain's for law and order, and he's Army, but folks ain't liking it too much. So far he's been doing it, though." Drew frowned. So even this far away from the scene of the old battles, the war still smoldered. The black bitterness of defeat was made harder by the victor. Drew's hand rubbed across the bulge beneath his shirt. In one pocket of the money belt were his papers, among them parole written out in Gainesville, which could prove he had ridden with General Forrest's command. Far removed from any Arizona guerrilla force, but to produce that would change Drew Kirby to Drew Rennie, and that he did not want to do. "I rode with General Forrest, attached to General Buford's scout," he said absently. "General Forrest?" Callie glowed. "Lordy, Mr. Kirby, that's sure something. It sure is. Only don't be saying that around Captain Bayless neither. He has him a big hate for General Forrest. Seems like Bayless was a colonel once till the general outsmarted him back east, and there was a big smoke-up about it. They cut the captain's spurs from him and ended the war out there. Now he ain't no patient man. He's the kind as uses his books hard when he's riding. You know, you sure can tell a lot about a man when you give a look at his hoss after he's come off the trail. That there shadow coat of yours and this here lady hoss and that old mule, anyone can see is how they've always been handled nice and easy. They ain't got no spite against 'em, and nobody wants to rub 'em down and give 'em feed. But some hosses, that get brung in here. They's wide-eyed and randy. Does you give 'em straight stare? For that, there's always a reason. Mostly you can see what it is when you look good and steady at the man who's riding 'em. Drew laughed. Glad I passed your tests, Callie. Guess I'll turn in now. Been a long day traveling. Sure thing. And from up there you can hear this little old mare. Does she need you? The Kentuckian's pack had been hoisted into the mow, and Callie even humped up the fragrant hay to Mattress's bedroll. A window was open to the night, and Drew stretched out wearily as he could hear the distant tinkle of a guitar, perhaps from the Four Jacks. Somewhere a woman began to sing, and the liquid Spanish words lulled him to sleep. He roused suddenly. His hands flashed under his head before he returned to full consciousness, fingers tightening on the colt he had placed there. Not the mare, no, rather the pound of running feet, and then a cry. No, senor, no. No es verdad. It's not true. Teodoro, he meant no harm. Drew scrambled to the window. Out in the alley below, figures reeled in a circle of light afforded by the door lantern. The Kentuckian marked the upward swing of a quirt lash, saw a smaller shape fling up an arm in vain attempt to ward off the blow. Another one who cried out was belaboring the flogger with empty fists, and the voice was that of a girl. To slide down the loft ladder was again near instinct and planned action. Shallow snorted as Drew's boots rapped on the floor. The Kentuckian had no idea of the reason for that fight, but he ran out with vague notion that an impartial referee was needed. You there, what's going on? Sergeant Remy came to life again in a snap demand. The one who fled the quirt came up against the side of the building, almost shoulder to shoulder with Drew. And he was only a boy about Callie's age, his black hair flopping over, eyes wide with shock and fright. Drew's hand moved and the lantern light glinted openly on the barrel of a Colt. For a moment, they were all still as if the sight of a weapon had frozen them. The attacker faced Drew directly. He was young and handsome, if you discounted a darkening bruise already puffing under his one eye, and a lip cut and swelling, a scowl of twisting rather heavy brows and making an ugly square of his mistreated mouth. And who the devil are you? His voice was thick and slurred. Drew guessed that he'd not only been in a fight, but that he was partly drunk. Yet, as he faced the stranger eye to eye, the Kentuckian was as wary as he had been when bellowing down a Tennessee ridge crest to scout a Yankee railroad blockhouse. He knew what he fronted. This was more than a drunken bully, a really dangerous man. That queer little moment of silence lengthened, shutting the two of them up, alone. Drew could not really name the emotion he felt. Deliberately, he tried to subdue the sensation as he turned to the girl. What's the matter? At first glance, he might have thought her a boy, for she wore hide breeches and boots, a man's shirt now hanging loosely about her hips. She jerked her head, and a thick braid flopped from under her wide-brimmed hat. Senor, por favor, please. We have done no wrong. We are the Trinfans, Teodoro and me. Teodoro, he finds Senor Juanito's purse in the road. He falls to give it back. He is not a bandito. He is not espia, a spy one. We are mustangers. Ask of Don Reese, of Senor Kells. Why, Senor Juanito, do you say Teodoro spy on you? Why you hit him with the whip? Not a thief, not spy. The boy beside Drew dropped and wheeled hand from his face. The man who says Teodoro Trinfan is ladron, bad one. I kill him. Drew's left arm swept across the boy's chest, pinning him back against the stable. Now, what's your story? Kentuckian asked the man he fronted. Just what's all this smoking about? Kells came out. You, Shannon? What are you doing here? Been drinking again? Fighting too, by the look of you. Senor Kells, the girl caught the older man's arm. Por favor, senor. We're not thieves, not spies. We come after Senor Juanito because he dropped his purse. Then he see Teodoro coming. He not listen. He beat him on with the quirt. If you know, we are honest peoples. Now then, Faquita. You don't get upset, gal. She was wailing aloud, making no effort to wipe away the tears running down her cheeks. Johnny, what kind of game you trying? You know these kids are straight. Them and their old mans come to work the range for wild ones on Rennie's own asking. Taking a quirt to the kid, eh? Kel's voice slid up the scale. You sure have yourself a snooful tonight. Now you just walk yourself out of here. On the bounce. I'm doing the saying of what goes on. You're on my property. You do a lot of saying, Kells. The scowl was gone. Shannon's battered mouth was actually smiling, but Drew decided he liked the scowl better than the smile and the tone of the voice accompanying it. Some men ought to put a hobble on their tongues. Sure, I know these young whelps and their pa too, sniffing round here where they ain't wanted, and mustangers ain't above throwing a sticky loop when they see a hoss worth it. We ain't blind on the range. His head swung a little as he was looking at the girl. You better hold that in mind, gal. Double R hosses have come up missing lately. It's easy to run a few prime head and go south to the moonlight trading at the border. And we don't take kindly to losing good stock. The boy lunged against Drew's pinning arm. Now he says we're horse thieves. Tell that to us before the Don Cazar. Shannon curled the quart lash about his wrist. Don't think I won't, Max. He don't like having his colt crop whittled down. Those blues eyes, brilliant yet oddly shallow and curtained, met Drew's for the second time. Don't know who you are, stranger, but you had no call to mix in. I'll be seeing you. Kind of free with a gun, leastwise it's showing it. As quick to back up your play? Try me. The words came out of Drew before he thought. Why had he said that? He never been one to pick a fight or take up a challenge. What was there about Shannon that prodded Drew this way? He'd met the gamecock breed before, and they never known to need to bristle at their crowing. Now he was disturbed that Shannon could prick him up so. Odd. The other had been successfully turned from his purpose here. Yet now, as he swung around and walked away down the alley, Drew was left with a nagging doubt, a feeling that in some way or other Shannon had come off even in this encounter. But how and why? Teodoro spat. His sister tugged at Kel's sleeve. It was not true what he said. Why does he wish to make trouble? Listen, gal, and you too, Teodoro. Just keep clear of Johnny Shannon when he's on the prod that way. I've known that kid since he had muscle enough to pull a gun, less take both hands to do the job. But he's not needing any two hands to unholster now, and he's drinking a lot. Mean, ugly drunk he is. Something must have riled him up good tonight. In the cantina, there was a soldier from the camp, Faquita volunteered. They call names. He and Senor Juanito fight. Don Reese, he put them both out in the street. Senor Juanito, he falls, drops purse. Teodoro picks it up, and we follow. When we try to give it back, Senor Juanito yells spy, and he hits with the whip. That's the truth. Por Dios, the truth. Yeah, sounds just like Johnny these days. Him with a snootful and somebody yelling Rev and Yank. Some men can't forget and don't seem to want to. Johnny sure takes it hard being on the losing side. Turned him dirt mean. Now you kids, you staying in town? Si, Paquita nodded vigorously, with Tia Maria. Then you get in there and stay clear of Johnny Shannon, sabe? No more trouble. Si, Senor Kels. You, Senor, she spoke to Drew. To you we owe a big debt. Come, Teodoro. She caught at her brother. She caught at her brother and pulled him away. What makes the kid go sour? Kells asked of the shadows beyond rather than of Drew. Johnny warn't no real trouble, for he skinned off to ride with Howard. Sure, he was always a wowin', but no more'n a lot of kids. And he'd answer the lead rein. Of course, we don't know what happened to him in Texas after the big retreat the Rebs made out of here. Could be he learned a lot of what was no good. Now he sops up whiskey when he hits town and picks fights, like he didn't get his belly full of that in the war. You can't never tell how a kid's gonna turn out. Hey, Mr. Kirby, you better get in here. Callie hailed from the stable. The mare, Drew jammed the Colt under his belt and ran. The scent of the hay grain of the horse, Drew's head rolled on the pillow and improvised from his hay blanket as the sun lay hot across his face. He rubbed the back of his hand over his eyes and then came fully awake to remember the night before. It took only a minute to get down the ladder into Shadow's stall, where a broom-tail jiggled up and down above absurdly long baby legs and small rounded haunches. Shadow's small daughter breakfasted. Callie squatted on his heels nearby, watching the process benignly. "Ain't she about the best favored filly you ever saw?" he asked. "How come all you hosses is gray, Shiloh? Her pa?" Drew shook his head. "No, her sire's Storm Cloud, but all that line of grays." "This Storm Cloud, he's a running hoss?" "About the runningest hoss in this part of the country, Callie. This filly ought to pick up her heels some if she takes after her damn sire." "What you naming her?" Up to that moment, Drew had not really thought about it. The crisp air blowing into the stable, carrying something besides the scent of town, gave him a suggestion. "How about Sage, Callie?" The boy thought seriously and then nodded. "Yeah, Sage. That's gray, ain't it? Pretty smells good, too." Drew pulled up his shirt, dug into the pocket of money belt for the horse papers, and got a pencil, or better, a pen and ink, in here anywhere. "Mr. Kells, he keeps ledgers over in the tack room. Got some ink and pen there. How come you need that? You ain't making out no bill of sale on her, are you?" Callie was shocked. "Hardly. I just want to put her down right and proper on the tally sheet." The boy followed to watch Drew make the record on the margin of Shadow's papers. As the Kentuckian explained, Callie was deeply interested. "You mean as how you can tell way back just what hosses bred you hosses? That's sure something. Round here, we knows good hoss, but we ain't always sure of his paw, not if he's wild stuff. Lots of wild horses here about then?" "Sure. Some just mustangs, others good stuff gone wild, run off by the patches and broke loose or got away from a wet hoss man." "Wet horse man?" Callie glanced at him a little sharply. "How come you ain't know about wet hosses? Heard tell as how they have 'em in the same trouble down Texas way." "But I don't come from the border country." "Well, Texas sure is a great big piece of country, so maybe you don't know about them river tricks. Wet hosses, they hosses that is run off up here, driven down to the border where they swap for horses what some Mexicans banditos have thrown a sticky loop over. Then the Mexicans take 'em to Anglo hosses south and sell 'em, where their brands ain't gonna get nobody into noose trouble. And the stolen Mex horses, they drove up here and maybe sold to some of the same fellows what lost the others. Hosses get themselves lost along them back country trails, especially if they're pushed hard. So them strays join up with the wild ones if a mustanger can rope him and bring it in, well, if it's a good one. Maybe so he'll get a reward from the man that's lost him. Heard tell that Don Cazar, he set some good rewards on a couple of studs as was run off the range this summer." "Don Cazar has good horses?" "About the best in these here parts. He runs 'em on the range, the old style, stud and 20-25 mares together with in a manada. All one color to a band. They sure is grand sight. Band of roans. The one of duns and some blacks. He's got one manada of all the guerrillas, sells some to the army and drives more clear to California. And the old dons down in Sonora come up once in a while to pick them out of some fancy saddle stock. He sure would enjoy seeing these grays of yours. If you ever want to sell, Don Cazar give you a top price. But I'm not selling. Drew folded the piece of paper he had been waving to dry the ink and put it back in the belt pocket. What's that? He could almost believe he heard an army bugle, but the call had sounded unlike cavalry signal he ever knew. Callie was already on his way to the door. Wagon train's coming, he cried out as he ran. Drew lingered by Shadow's box. Philly was resting in the straw, her matchstick legs folded under her, and the mare was munching on the extra feed of oats and Kentuckian had tipped in for her. He could hear the sound of other running feet outside. It would seem that all tobacco was turning out for the welcome of the wagon train of traders from the south. Drew's curiosity got the better of him. He went out to the plaza. Only a well-armed, convoyed set of wagons with a highly experienced, competent master could dare travel the Apache-infested trails these days. The first of the freighters, pulled by a 16-mule team, fairly burst into the plaza, outriders fanning about it. One of the mounted men was dressed in fringed buckskin. His shoulder-length hair and bushy black beard, badge of a frontier already passing swiftly into history. He rode a big black mule and carried a long-barreled rifle, not in the saddle boot, but resting across the horn, as if even in Tobacco there might be a reason for instant action. The mule trotted onto the middle of the plaza. Then the weapon pointed skyward as if its owner fired it into the air, voicing a whoop as wild as a rebel yell from the throat of a charging Texas trooper. He was answered by cries and shouts from the gathering crowd as 5 more wagons, each with a trailer hooked to its main bolt, pulled in around the edge of the open area until the center of town was full, and the din-braying mules was deafening. Drew retreated to the roofed entrance of the Four Jacks. The extra step of height there enabled him to get a good look at 2 more horsemen pushing past the end of the wagon. Both wore the dress of Mexican gentlemen. Their short jackets glinted with silver braid and embroidery. Their bridles, horse gear, and saddles were rich in scrolls of decoration of the same metal. Navajo blankets lay under their saddles, and serapes were folded over the shoulder of one rider, tied behind the cantle of the other. They pulled up before the cantina, and one man took the reins of both mounts. If the riders' clothing and horse furnishing were colorful, the horses themselves were equally striking. One was a chestnut, warm, well-groomed red, but the other Drew stared. In all his years about the stables and breeding farms of Kentucky, and throughout his travels since, he'd never seen a horse like this. Its coat was pure gold, a perfect match to one of the eagles on his money belt. But the silky locks of mane and tail were night black. Its breeding was plainly Arab, and it walked with a delicate pride as gracefully as a man might foot a dance. Drew had a difficult time breaking his gaze from the horse to the man dismounting. The ranchero was tall, perhaps an inch or two taller than Drew. His body had the leanness of the men who worked the range country, possessing, too, a lithe of youthfulness and carriage. Until one looked directly into his sun-browned face, he could pass as a man still in his late 20s. But the older, perhaps a decade older than that, Drew thought, 2 high and prominent cheekbones with slight hollows below him, and his mouth tight set, made more of a strength of will and discipline of feeling than conventional good looks. Yet his face was not easily forgotten, once seen. Black hair was pepper-salted for a finger-wide space above his ears, which were fronted by long sideburns, and black brows were straight above dark eyes. In spite of his below-the-border dress and his coloring, he was unmistakably Anglo. Just as the man looping both horses' reins the rack was a Mexican. "So you're still wearing your hair in good order? No trouble this trip?" Topman had come to the door of the cantina. He said, hand outstretched. "Welcome back, Hunt." "Pa," the Mexican spat, "where is the one Indio who is able to face Don Cazar on his own ground? The folly of that they learned long ago." Don Cazar smiled. That mask of aloofness has wiped away as if he were 10 years younger and 20 years less responsible than he had been only seconds earlier. And if they did not beware of our rifles, Bartolome here would talk them to death. Is that not so, amigo? His speech was oddly formal, as if using language other than his own. But there was a warmth to the tone which matched the sudden and surprising smile. Topham's arm went about the shoulders and under the back of the silver jacket, drawing Don Cazar into the light, music, and excitement of the cantina. While Drew watched, the stouter back of Bartolome cut off his first good look at his father. "So that was Don Cazar? Hunt Rennie." Drew did not know what he had expected of their first meeting. Now he could not understand why he felt so chilled and lost. He had planned it this way: no demands, no claims on a stranger, freedom to make the decision of when or how he would see his father. That was the only path he could take. But now he turned slowly away from that open door, the light and the laughter, singing, and walked back toward the table, loneliness cutting into him.